much insight as you can from all stakeholders who are going to be impacted. And that may be with folks who have competing interests, right? And so really understanding how best to do that is critical. We've been learning a lot of frameworks around narrative strategy and leveraging people's lived experience in the conversation, which is really critical. But it's also important to infuse a lot of the goals as far as your outcome goals and your deliverables that you're trying to achieve in your design. And a big part of that is, again, infusing other skill sets like conflict management and negotiation. So today we'll be watching a few videos that go over some of these skills. We'll answer a few questions and we'll participate in some skill building activity where we'll be able to use some frameworks like the BOTNA and the WATNA, which are translated to best alternatives to a negotiative situation. And then the WATNA is the worst alternative to a negotiated outcome, right? And so really understanding how to leverage your context of best versus worst in regards to your project deliverables is really critical because there's multiple impasses that you can come to in engaging multiple stakeholders, right? And you really want to know which of those impasses cannot be moved forward upon, right? Like, is this a situation that means that you can't move forward with the project, or is this something that you can kind of, negotiate or compromise on? So we'll learn different techniques on conflict management, and then we'll learn more about what your BOTNA and the WATNAs are, and we'll go back to using those frameworks that we've been going on, especially as it relates to aligning interests to the social determinants of health, as well as framing the insight that you learn within the narrative canvas model. So without further ado, we're going to go ahead and watch this video quickly around conflict management styles. I want you to listen to this video, paying particularly close attention to the different types of styles that I mentioned, and really account for that because there's going to be some questions that we'll be going through in relation to this video. So let's get into it.
Conflict is inevitable and part of all of our relationships. Conflict can be good. Based and part of all conflict is inevitable and part of all of our relationships. Conflict can be good and has many benefits when managed appropriately. Given this, it is best to embrace conflict and learn how to manage it. Learning conflict management does not mean subscribing to only one pattern. Clearly, everyone has their own styles of conflict management, which reflects their own unique wants, needs, and values. However, there are specific global patterns in conflicts that can be identified based on how we deal with such challenges. The important thing to remember is that no one style is a pure typology and inherently better than the other. You must be wondering, what are the benefits of being aware of my own conflict management style? Well, as you recognize your style, you can better understand its strengths and weaknesses. Also, you can increase your ability to adopt different styles relative to the inevitable conflicts that arise in interpersonal relationships as you learn when each style is the best to employ. By embracing conflict as a part of life, you can make the most of each situation and use it as a learning or a leadership opportunity. You can also use it as an opportunity to transform the situation into something better. In the 1970s, researchers Kenneth Thomas and Rolf Killman developed a model for conflict management. It was called the Thomas-Killman model after them. The Thomas Kilmann conflict model evaluates an individual's behavior in conflict situation. In a conflict situation, we can describe a person's behavior along two basic dimensions. Number one, assertiveness, the extent to which the individual attempts to satisfy his or her own concerns. And number two, cooperativeness, the extent to which the individual attempts to satisfy the other person's concern. These two dimensions of behavior can be used to define 5 moods of dealing with conflict. These 5 conflict handling moods are competing, collaborating, avoiding, accommodating, and compromising. They also provide detailed information on how to use these different conflict handling styles effectively. To illustrate these styles, they selected specific animals. Are you a shark competing for limited resources? Or a wise owl, listening to everyone's point of view? A teddy bear just wanting to keep the peace, or a fox working out a way to salvage something from the situation? Or you are the turtle withdrawing into your shell and avoiding the whole situation? The competitive shark, do it my way or not at all. This is the typical attitude of the shark. Sharks use a forcing or competing style to achieve their goals. They have a need to win. Therefore, other must lose. When competing, an individual pursues his or her own concerns at the other person's expense, using whatever power seems appropriate to win their position, even if it means being uncooperative, threatening, and intimidating. They strongly defend a position they believe is correct or simply try to win. If the shark decision is truly correct, a better decision can result. However, it may result in hostility and resentment toward the shark or damaged relationships. This style may be appropriate for emergencies when you need quick, decisive action and people are aware of and support of the approach, or when unpopular decisions need to be implemented. The collaborative owl. My preference is, what is your choice? All use a collaborative or problem confronting conflict management style. Value their goals and relationships. They gather information, look for alternatives, dialogue openly, and welcome disagreements. All view conflict as problem to be solved and work to find solutions agreeable to all sides. The advantage of this strategy is that relationships are maintained because both sides get what they want and negative feelings are eliminated. On the other hand, this takes a great deal of time and effort to synthesize everybody's ideas. The appropriate time to use an old style is when the issue and relationship are both important. The avoidant turtle. Conflict? What conflict? Turtles avoid, withdraw, deny, or delay conflicts. They would rather hide and ignore conflict than to resolve it. This leads them to be uncooperative and unassertive. Turtles even tend to give up personal goals. This may help to maintain relationships that would be hurt by conflict resolution, but conflicts and negative feelings may linger too. This is often appropriate when the issue is trivial or the relationship is insignificant. Sometimes it can be effective when the atmosphere is emotionally charged and you need to create some space. Accommodating teddy bear. Whatever you say. Teddy bears use a soothing and accommodating conflict management style with emphasis on human relationships. They agree and flatter because they have a need to please everyone involved. Therefore, teddy bears often neglect their own desired outcomes to satisfy those of the others. There is an element of self-sacrifice. Sometimes accommodating maintain relationships, but the bear may be taken advantage of. However, it is good to use this when you really don't care about the issue or when you realize you are wrong and the other party has a better solution. The compromising fox. I will give you this if you give me that. Foxes use a compromising conflict management style. Individuals who use this approach are concerned about goals in relationships. They have a strategy of little something for everyone. They tend to find mutually acceptable solutions that partially satisfy both parties. Foxes are willing to sacrifice some of their goals while persuading others to give up part of theirs. Compromise is assertive and cooperative. This way it is possible to maintain relationships and find solutions, but compromise is not always ideal. Compromising is suitable to use situations when complex issues have no clear solutions or when people in conflict have equally important solutions.
So yeah, that was a quick video to introduce you all to different conflict management styles. Right now, I want you all to spend about 15 minutes responding to the questions that you see here on the screen. What are the conflict management styles? Why is it important to understand your conflict management styles to negotiate? In what ways do you negotiate on a daily basis? And how are your outcomes impacted by your preferred negotiation style? How do you decide if you had a successful negotiation? And what ways do you negotiate with yourself? So these are the questions that I want you all to take a little bit of time to respond to. And then we'll go ahead and come back as a group and share out on some of these responses that you all came up with. And then we'll move on with our lecture. All right. Any questions before we break out? All right. So here, stop sharing. So, publish. So the link should be available on your modules. If you take a look at your module week 10, it should be available. Lecture conflict management style and negotiating solutions. Um, the lecture link should be available. But I will also drop it in the chat. Let's see. And the questions are also in the chat. Does anyone need more time? Thumbs up if you need more time. All right. Thumbs up for everyone that's back with me. Awesome. Let's have a few share outs for these discussion questions. Um, who wants to volunteer for the first response? What are the conflict management styles identified? Go ahead, Jorge.
Um, oh, okay.
Oh, Isaac, if you want, you can. Go ahead.
No, go for it. Go for it.
Okay. Well, I just rewatched the video and went through. I think I like the analogy of using the animals. So I found the competitive shark, the collaborative owl, the avoidant turtle, the accommodating teddy bear and the compromising fox.
Nice,
Yeah.
nice. Those are some pretty cool connections. And it's interesting because sometimes you might see yourself as multiple at any given time or one in a particular situation. Why do you think it's important to understand conflict management styles to negotiate? You want to jump in on that one, Isaac?
Um, sure. One second. Sorry, I was just eating some popcorn.
No worries, no worries.
Well, I think just knowing, I guess, um, knowing your style can help you with your strengths and weaknesses, and I guess overall negotiation.
Mhm, mhm. Yeah, no, that's important. It can let you know your strengths and weaknesses. Um, and it also can give you multiple options to choose from, right? Like like your strength is your go-to, but you may need to move to another option, right? And so maybe when you learn about the conflict management styles, you're like, oh, this is how I am on a regular basis. However, with the knowledge of the other options, you can pivot to other options if needed, right? Carla, looks like your hand is raised.
Yes, professor. So my last career was a retail manager for about over a decade. So I know a lot about conflict management.
Hmm.
And yeah, and this is really helpful because I can see myself being all of the above, even even a turtle. So knowing different styles, different how you manage them and how you manage other people that like you're in a resolution with or you're trying to get a resolution with is going to be really helpful because not everyone will respond to a shark, right? Not everyone will respond to a turtle. Um so and different situations as well are going to be um or there's you have to assess different situations because you have to relate your style to that as well too.
Indeed, indeed. You definitely have to assess the situation and figure out, which style is best because in certain situations you may need to be a shark, right? Especially if your back is up against the wall and someone's, let's say, trying to, make you to commit to terms that aren't really in alignment to what your goals are. Or you're really adamant about, the timeline that you're on and you're trying to get a commitment on the other side um, before the timeline is up, or trying to, make sure that your position on the issue is very clear. Um, so yeah, that's critical. Understanding different negotiation styles depending on the circumstance is really, really critical, and having that tool in your back pocket is super, super helpful. So this is a really good question for everyone. We'll have a few folks respond to this question. What ways do you negotiate on a daily basis, and how are your outcomes impacted by your preferred negotiation style? I see Claudia responded in the chat to this. The ways I negotiate on a daily basis are to collaborate with others and myself's perspectives, and I also negotiate with myself to get what I think is best, the best option for me, while disregarding anyone else's wants or needs. It looks like Melissa also responded to this question. Um, well, at work, I'm accommodating to clients so that they can continue to come back. At school, I'm collaborative and I have multiple projects to work on with groups. I like that. I like that. So in certain environments, you use different approaches. That's awesome, Melissa. Anybody else want to respond to that?
Can respond. I would say I agree. I use like a variety of conflict management styles depending on the situation. On a daily basis, I have a teenage daughter, so there's always moments to practice conflict management. And it really depends on the moment. It depends on how the other person is responding. If they're not in a place to come to a solution, then I probably lean towards like I don't know if it's a turtle, but you just kind of give space and then come back to it later. I think also in like retail, I worked in retail as well, and depending on the customer and the situation, tend to like start out very accommodating to make sure they feel heard and listened to, and then try to find a solution that suits both the business's interests and the customer's interests.
Mm, that's really, really great insight there. And, I feel, this new generation of teenagers have a little more space to negotiate than, us millennials used to have growing up, right? Which isn't
Definitely.
necessarily a bad thing, right? But it's different. It's different. Um, yeah, thank you so much for sharing. Anybody else want to jump in on this question before we move on?
I can share.
Yeah, go ahead.
I was gonna say it makes me think of trying to decide on what to eat for dinner with my partner. And like sometimes one of us will choose like the protein option and one of us will choose the veggie option if we can't come to agreement on the meal in total. So just little things like that come up, you know.
I like that. I think you might have found a solution for a few folks with that. How to overcome decision making around eating, right? What's gonna be the meal for tonight? You might have saved some arguments right there, Maya. Thank you. Um, yeah, these are some really great responses. Let's move on to the next question. How do you decide if you've had a successful negotiation? And I do see some responses in the chat. Let's read some of those. Let's see, where's the chat? Okay. Right? Philip said, let me jot that down. I love it. Let's see. So, Issy, thank you for responding in the chat. I think a successful negotiation is when everyone feels like they've been given space to voice their opinion and be heard. The outcomes, whether compromise um, or letting of goals may vary depend on the context of timeline. But as a baseline, a successful negotiation respects the perspective of all parties. Thank you for that, Issy. Philip, do you want to jump in?
Oh yeah, sure, sure. I kind of feel like uh God, like I think when you're younger, the answer is if you get what you want. Like I think, as we get older, I kind of feel like it's most important to be true to myself, right? So like, am I making a reasonable commitment, right? Did I manage the other person's expectations well? Did I communicate clearly? And so part of that is like being clear about what I want in the situation. But then the other half of that is just like, as he said, like really doing a good job listening to what the other person has to say and
Mhm.
then trying to like get together on a solution, right? That works for both of y'all, kind of thing.
Indeed, indeed. Collaboration is key because sometimes what happens is when you're, working with folks, you can come up with a better outcome than you would have thought of by yourself, right? And so sometimes having that exchange and connecting with people and clarifying what their interests are and understanding how it relates to your own can enhance the outcome because now, what do they say? Two minds are greater than one, right? So really looking at how do you leverage some of these negotiations to even improve the outcome that you could have considered on your own. So yeah, that's good stuff there. And then we have this last question. We talked a lot about folks negotiating with other folks, right? And oftentimes that's how it happens, but there are times when we negotiate with ourselves. So anybody want to share a couple of share outs on what ways you negotiate with yourself?
Um, I can go, Professor.
Yeah, go ahead and jump in there.
I guess in some ways I would negotiate myself. It's just basically like weighing out the options that I have, and basically just trying to like balance it as best as I can, trying to compare both of them. And so I guess I'd be playing like a collaborative form
Mhm.
of negotiation with myself. So just like not, closing off a certain option, but just weighing them, see which one is better. Um, and then I guess it'd be like a bit of compromise as well, because I'd have to, like sacrifice one thing to get the ultimate result that I want. So
Mhm.
I'd say a little bit of those two things.
I love that. I love that. You definitely have to compromise. And sometimes it's about capacity, right? Sometimes we're tired and we have to figure out what are we going to prioritize with the rest of our energy. And really having those internal negotiations happens more consistent than we may think. Anybody else want to share? All right, I see somebody's hand. Jorge, yes, go ahead and jump in.
Yeah, I think like for me personally, I think negotiating effort into like whatever, I guess.
We might have lost you. I can no longer hear you, Jorge. Feel free to write in the chat, Jorge, but we will go ahead and move on. So that was a really great video. It went over the um, 5 different categories for conflict management, right? So what we're gonna do now is another activity. Before we do that, I'm gonna give y'all some time to go on break. But let me go over these instructions first. When we come back from break at 7 o'clock, we will do this conflict management style exercise. And what I want you all to do is complete this activity in the mind frame of a landscape architect. Which of these conflict management styles in the projects that you're currently working on or in projects that you've worked on in the past have shown up in your design process? Describe the scenario in context of the conflict management style and describe why you think that conflict management style was most effective or ineffective, right? So if it was effective and it achieved an outcome that you desired, then explain why do you think that helped. If, for example, the outcome wasn't a desirable outcome, how do you feel that conflict management style contributed to that outcome, right? So again, we'll go ahead and work on this when we come back from break, but really looking at the different conflict management styles, we really want to think of it in context of our design process. Any questions before we break? All right, well, go ahead and come back at 7, and we'll go ahead and get started right on to this activity. Um, I will have the link available in the chat, and it is also available on the presentation link. All right, so we should be coming back. Thumbs up if you're back with me. Awesome. All right, so go ahead and put the link in the chat. So again, this is a conflict management exercise, and we're thinking through this in context of our landscape design process, thinking of different stakeholders that you've had engagement with, whether that be city officials, community stakeholders. What's coming to mind for you in relation to these conflict management styles? Please respond to at least two, and thinking through how they show up in the design process. Any questions on the activity directions? Does everyone have access to the link? Thumbs up if you have access to the link. Awesome. Well, folks, go ahead and respond away. And I'll be looking for everyone's responses for this week's activities. So how are we doing? Do we need more time? Thumbs up if you need more time. All right, we'll come back at 7:15. All right, we should be making our way back now. Go ahead and give me those thumbs up if you are back with me. Awesome, awesome. So let's share this screen. All right, so we got some really great responses on here. Who wants to go ahead and jump in and read some of these responses on accommodate? I'll go ahead and read the first one, but folks get ready to volunteer for some of these other ones. We'll pick about four from each section. You could jump in and read yours or one that interests you. um, to create designs that are accommodating for all in the community, right? So in landscape architecture, you're really thinking of, the individual, how they'll use the site, how the site will impact their day-to-day lives. You also can accommodate the environment, right? The different flora and fauna that are native to the area, ensuring that there's a place for them to exist, raise their young, create like that wildlife habitat component. And that accommodation is critical, and oftentimes you want to think of it from like that universal design perspective. What comes to mind also is accessibility. So accommodating a site's needs for accessibility. And so what does that look like in your design process? So that's really, really great. Create designs that are accommodating for all in the community. Yes, indeed. Who wants to jump in and read either theirs or one that stands out for them in this section?
I can jump in and read mine.
Go ahead and jump in there.
So I said landscape architects have to accommodate building codes. They may have to sacrifice some design goals, but maintaining good relationships with building departments is essential.
Awesome. And how has that come up for you in your experience, or um, why do you think that accommodation awareness is important in the design process?
I used to work in an architecture firm, and we had this one project where we went through uh, just a ridiculous amount of like corrections with the building department, because my boss was wanted to like keep this one design and wasn't really willing to budge on it, even though it wasn't meeting code. So that was kind of like a waste of the client's money and like our resources. So I think it's important to kind of be aware of building code and um, that whole process, just so that you're, using your time efficiently.
That is spot on, right? I always talk about guardrails when you're developing a design or a policy initiative. You want to make sure that those guardrails are clear. There's, environmental constraints, those policy constraints that we often talk about, right? There's economic constraints, and you really want to have those clear guardrails so that, as you're dreaming within capacity, right? And that saves money in the long run, because if you're in compliance, you're being mindful of the different regulations that you have to adhere to. That's going to save you money in the long run, because you're either going to have to do something over, start all of your project over, which is a waste of money, or you're going to have to pay fines and fees, right? And so none of that is fun, and especially if you're working on behalf of a client. So definitely spot on. Great, great example. Let's go ahead and have a couple of more share outs in this section. We have a couple of more share outs in this section, and then we'll move on to avoid.
I can share mine.
Awesome.
So I wrote, sometimes as a landscape architect, you may not get to execute your design idea because it doesn't meet the community's needs like you thought it would. You need to listen to the community and trust them and design based on that.
That is super, super important. You may have an assumption that you're coming to the project with, believing that, they need trees, right? And, you find out that the priority is not necessarily trees, but overhead lights, so that folks can get safely to and from their cars, or they can avoid, hitting things in the street, so really getting insight from your uh, end user stakeholder, the most impacted stakeholder that you're really trying to work with, is the one that's going to end up accessing the infrastructure that you're building around the landscape design. So that's a big one. That's a really spot on. And if you have to sacrifice your vision for the communities, it's better to uplift the community's vision and figure out how to bring their vision to life versus trying to push the front line of keeping your vision alive. So that's spot on, and thank you so much for naming that. We'll take one more share out from this section and then we'll move on.
I can share mine.
Awesome.
So I put that landscape architect has to consider like all the needs of stakeholders with their own, as well as especially during their own design and their during the process, so that they can accommodate them by addressing all their needs properly.
Awesome. Awesome. That is really, really awesome. And has that come up for you in like any projects that you've experienced that you want to give an example of?
Well, I don't really have like professional experience, but I guess
Hmm.
in some of my studio projects, there's sometimes where I had to like I did something on my design and then I had to like go back and fix it because some of the stakeholders did not agree with it. So it wasn't like what they needed or it wasn't like according to what design that they were looking for. So I had to like, fix it and make it come up with a new design. So yeah, just
Hmm.
accommodate for them.
And that's good because then it becomes something that can be useful, right? And that's super important for your design is how it takes form. And oftentimes you want to make sure that the form is also reflective of function. And the functionality is really what's key with your design. And wanting to make sure that your stakeholders see their functionality in their view of what they need in regards to your site is super critical. You want to have those components built in so that it's not something one that you can speak to, right? Like if your client speaks to, oh, where's this idea coming from? You can reflect their interest in what you come up with. And then they can confirm that, yes, that's exactly what I was looking for, or it's serving the function that I desire, right? So that's really great. Let's go to avoid. This is a interesting one. This is the avoidant turtle, right? So in what situations in the design process is avoiding happening, or can it be meaningful, or have you witnessed it? Anybody want to jump in and share based off of what they are interested in or either what they wrote?
I could share mine.
Yeah, go ahead.
I feel like I took it more as like the literal sense. Like I put like certain areas of design could be an issue, like fixed objects that can't be moved, like certain roads or other structures, because you would want to avoid like proposing ideas like this because if you're working with a client, like ultimately like you would be spending their money. And
Hmm.
so maybe like pushing that design, like maybe putting in their head like, oh, like this could happen, but maybe like budget wise it couldn't. Maybe they might be let down because of that.
Yeah, no, that's spot on. Those design constraints, especially like, these environmental constraints, whether it's a geometrical fragment or form that is on the site, right? We talked about that in previous lectures. What does that look like and how do you manage around it? And sometimes you can even incorporate it as a centerpiece in your design. But like you said, there may be things that you want to avoid, fixed objects like even water piping, gas piping, right? Uh, there was just a recent visit that we did in the valley at some of the parks. And one of the issues was not putting the signage where there was water pipe. So like there was like water fountains in next to one of the site designs. And to avoid that water fountain, we couldn't think of signage for the site in that area, right? So really thinking of things that you want to avoid on your site. That's really, really good context. Thank you for sharing that. Who else wants to jump in?
I can share mine.
Awesome.
Um, I put when an issue or concern doesn't directly impact the project and you're not in a position to fix it, but it keeps coming up. After making sure the person or the organization feels listened to, you may need to move on to other concerns that directly affect the project.
Yes, yes. And that may mean that that component can't move forward, right? And so um to deal with that, what's really big is transparency, right? But you're really in that situation trying to avoid future challenges of compliance or regulation. And so you being upfront with your client in regards to how a certain concern will impact the project, being transparent with that, giving them an opportunity to fix it, providing clear guidance on what steps they may take, but not again doing the work for them, because again, delegating roles and responsibilities, and then providing deadlines, right? Like giving clear deadlines for, clarity around, hey, to avoid any issues with this, we're going to need this clarity by this date, right? And if they can't move on with that, you can give them that ultimatum, like that part of the project we cannot move forward with, and we're avoiding addressing that moving forward, right? It no longer is an option. It's no longer tenable. uh those things are really important, but again, in those situations it's important to be as transparent as possible. um but it's better to avoid, again, uh non-compliance with regulation or zoning codes or ordinances versus someone's feelings. um So who else wants to jump in? There's some really good ones here too. Philip, I see your hand raised.
So I put, sometimes a client says something, inappropriate, offensive, racist, sexist, homophobic, like, harmful to certain groups or have you. And so there's a bit of tension there, right? Because we're in a system where people who have money generally dictate what happens, right? At least in the private space. And a lot of times those people might not have the same mindset as you toward a lot of things. So, that's always, thankfully, I haven't run into that too much, but that's always a conflict, right? You is so sometimes like I've just tried to kind of get the work done and minimize my interaction with the person and never work from there again. And when it's feasible, um, I'll just find a reason to stop the work and just be like, you know what, can't do it right now. You know, but
Mhm,
what
mhm,
I mean, but it's I'm always chatting with other people and trying to think about how we handle these situations where your values are coming in conflict, right, with the
mhm.
client. You know.
Yeah, you bring up a good point, and we'll talk a little bit more of this and later in this class, but there are situations where, you know, you're reaching that impasse, right? Where the the project scope or the experience starts to lean more into your WATNA, and we'll learn a little bit of more about what WATNA is the worst alternative to a negotiation. And what happens in that situation, let's say your WATNA is, I do not allow any inappropriate, offensive, racist, sexist, homophobic language or rhetoric, or, because say, for example, if you have a team and you're trying to keep your team safe, and you have a client who, for whatever reason, is making remarks that can be offensive to people on your team, and you don't want to put your team in a situation where they're being traumatized or threatened or made to feel inferior in any way. So if they come across that, one of your conclusions, like you said, could be this client can no longer get service, or you may even decide that this project must immediately come to an end, depending on how egregious it is, right? So we'll talk a little bit about more of the BOTNA and WATNA, but to your point, you can't really control the client's actions, but you can create, you know, boundaries, right? That you can hold your company to, or your personal self to. Like maybe you're working for a company that doesn't have consistent values, and you want to remove yourself from that company and look for, new opportunities that are more aligned to what your values are, so looking at mission statements or, doing research on your clients, especially if they're well known or, within industries where they have to have public profiles, right? And so, yeah, no, that's a really good one. Let's move on to collaborate. This is one of my favorite ones and definitely one that's most aligned to what we've been learning this semester around collective impact, right? So who wants to share out with some of these share outs for collaboration?
I
The
can
collaborative owl.
I can I can go since I think I'm the first one there.
Yes.
So, for the my work right now, how I manage a garden at San Diego Natural History Museum, and the way it came about is not just the museum saying like, hey, we want a native garden. It was really something out of the ordinary for Balboa Park. Um, since Balboa Park, as we know, is a lot of exotic plants, a lot of tropical, a lot of water loving plants. Um, so it was something that we really needed a lot of buy-in from everybody, including the city, including the person who pretty much wrote the master plan of a ballpark in the 80s. And it was really great because she was like, wait, I wrote that plan like decades and decades ago when we had water, when we didn't have drought problems. So now is the time to change it. And the Natural History Museum is kind of promoting that. So it was a really good collaborative project that Spurlock, landscape architect led and the museum as well led.
Nice. And it looks like you engage local native tribal groups as well.
Yes. Yeah, I forgot to say that.
Yeah,
Yes. And
no, I see it written here, and that's super critical, right? There are a few native tribes in San Diego, and many of them are very organized and well engaged. But there's never like because there's federal recognition for some tribes, and some tribes just don't have that federal recognition. I know in San Diego, the ones that at least are listed have federal recognition and also have reservations. But engaging native tribal groups is a very unique practice because it's different and it requires different engagement practices, right?
yes.
Understanding who is native to the particular site that you're operating in, understanding other sites that you may want to engage, and then also respecting the wishes of the native tribal communities, which is again sometimes its own process that is different from uh engagement with, let's say, regular San Diego residents
Exactly. The
not
museum
associated with
actually,
the tribal group.
I just want to add on to that. We have at the museum have developed a system and almost like a map on how we would approach um local indigenous tribes on if we wanted to collaborate and partner. And a lot of those is, how do we respectfully make an ask and not just ask? And offering something in return
Mhm.
most of the time as well.
Yes, yes, indeed. Yes, thank you so much for sharing that, Carla. Let's go to anyone else that would like to share either an entry that interests them or that they wrote in this section. I'm gonna go ahead and read this one here. Shout out to whoever added a photo. Landscape architects collaborate with stakeholders consisting of community members and various people of interest to form design outcomes or goals. So that requires a lot of collaboration. This here looks like an example of a gathering place to learn, communicate, and celebrate at the Lyle Center at Cal Poly Pomona. So it's on campus. Raise your hand if you've been to this location on campus, or a thumbs up. Okay, some folks have seen this place. I have to check this out soon. Let's see. And then let's see. So at the John T. Lyle Center, it is a place committed to listening to needs and wants of Cal Poly Pomona students, faculties, and volunteers. It is a place to collaborate on how to practice regenerative studies at the site and later at various project locations. So that's important, right? Because not only is it showing best practices, but it's giving people an experience to engage and participate in those outcomes. So thank you so much for whoever added this entry. We'll go ahead and have one more share out from this section, and then we'll move to the compromising fox. Any collaborative owls want to share out one more time? Thank you, Melissa, for that entry and for the photo as well. One more, we need one more collaborative owl. One
Read
more
mine.
collaborative owl.
I can read mine.
Awesome, thank you.
In most public projects, landscape architects have to collaborate with many different entities, the public, city officials, county officials, state organizations, etc. Needing to follow guidelines at many different levels requires you to collaborate with many different organizations at the same time.
Indeed, right? So I feel you should always lead with collaboration. And that's the best practice. And sometimes what that does is it allows you to mitigate some barriers that may be perceived versus realized. Some of the barriers are more in relation to clarity of process, understanding roles and responsibilities, engaging stakeholders around what you assume their roles and responsibilities, and getting clarity because they may have a role in what you're assuming, but it may not be as you think it is. I'm trying to think of an example of. So right now, I'm doing some research for workforce development, and there's a lot of opportunity to clarify who manages the hiring process at the state level. And there's multiple agencies and departments that are part of it, right? So in this example, I really think that it's important because it's saying that, you have to collaborate with multiple public officials, city officials, county, even state level folks. And most of the time, they're not talking to each other. So you may be uncovering barriers that they have not yet considered because they've never had the set of circumstances that you're bringing to address, bringing up to address at that time. And so sometimes your forethought in understanding who's playing what role helps them be more effective in playing the role you need them to play. And let's say, you're thinking, well, this may be a policy change. And you're like, well, we don't have time for a policy change. Well, it may not require a policy change. It may already exist as a policy that just needs to be implemented and coordinated, right? The departments that need to touch bases may not have had the conversations they need to have, or they may not have, received the questions that they need in order to take the action that is required, right? And so what happens in a lot of these coalition spaces, or let's say you as a stakeholder who has like this purview of multiple perspectives, you can create a narrative, you can build a clear understanding of how all these pieces play in together, and make sure that these stakeholders are collaborating towards your goals, right? And understand their roles and responsibilities in relation to achieving your outcome. So again, I really like this entry in regards to naming the collaboration that needs to take place across these different agencies. Many of these agencies within them are very siloed, right? So you can only imagine how siloed they are across agencies when you're talking about how does the city work with the county or how does the city work with the state, right? Again, sometimes you'll have to create that coalition. You may have to organize the meeting that you need to, have take place in order for, city planning and the Department of Building and Safety to give you clear guidance on, the constraints that may exist regarding your project design, right? Um, you may have to work with EWDD to ensure that they can support the business owners that you plan to have do monthly food vendors events on your site, right? So coordinating across these agencies to make sure that they, are providing resource support or guidance around policy compliance, right? For your projects is definitely big and always at play. So thanks for that entry. Let's go to the compromising fox. Do we have some compromising foxes in the building? Who wants to share for compromising fox? Either your entry or one that stands out to you. Not everybody all at once. I will jump in and read one, and then I'll wait for two volunteers to raise their hand. Um, so landscape architects compromise on a daily basis to change and alter designs to fit required needs of the community or to create better forms and flow of the site. Yes, right. Um, I like this idea of form and flow. Um, when you're talking about flow of your site, how it's accessed, its proportionality or relationship to the parking or different infrastructure that you have on your site, whether it's a park or an area where folks are playing baseball. Like, how are you designing your site in regards to flow? And then also when you're thinking of aspects of accommodations, right? We talked about accommodations earlier, but compromising aesthetic for function and form, right? How you're using existing landscape features, natural hills, natural lighting, and then how are you incorporating hardscapes or other landscape features to enhance the site? Maybe you need to add ramps so that it's accessible for wheelchairs. You may have to add lighting so that it's visible at nighttime to navigate the site, right? And sometimes they may require you to compromise where those aspects are, depending on how big your site is, again, how accessible you want your site. So certain things can't be as far as away from the parking lot if you want it to be accessible to people who are, let's say, in wheelchairs, or you need to have ramp access. You want to be mindful of how you level the site so that it's safe for people to, maneuver their in a wheelchair. You don't want the grade of the site to be too high, right? Where it's easy for folks to roll down the hill a little faster than they would like to, right? So you want to have those considerations. That's a really great entry. Who else wants to jump in and share for the compromising foxes before we go to the competitive sharks. We'll have two more in this section, and then we'll close out with the competitive sharks for this activity. Let's see, Chase. Do you see one on here that either you entered or that sparks your interest? Chase Gill. So feel free to come off mute or respond in the chat. Let's go to you, Sergio. Have you had a chance to share yet? Either an entry you made or that sparks your interest.
Wait, sorry, did you call me? I was away from my computer.
Yes, Chase. We're checking out the compromising foxes. So if you have an entry here, you can read your entry, or I would like you to choose one that you that resonates with you.
Okay, I'll say mine. Sorry about that.
No worries.
What I put was landscape architects compromise on the daily to change and alter designs to fit the required needs of the community to create better forms or flow of a site just based on like community input. And ultimately that helps create like the best design possible.
Awesome. And is there an example that you want to share from either a class project, studio project, or a real world situation?
I would say currently like studio project, we had like a board of people like come in and comment on our project. So I took that information and like I'm trying to implement it through like my final design because I feel like it's really good feedback in the end.
Awesome. Awesome. Let's go back to you, Sergio. Do you want to go ahead and jump in there? What about you, Patty?
Hello. So I didn't put one on here, but I'll read one.
Awesome.
Um, Landscape architects compromise with clients, finding a meeting place between construction and design knowledge and the lived experience of the community they're designing for.
Awesome. How has that shown up in your student projects or real world situations?
Um, well, for me, it's finding out what the community needs and then basing design off of that. So
Yes.
designing for the community.
Yes. It's super important to design for the community. The compromise really comes up oftentimes when you're thinking of, the budget constraints and you can't really put everything in there, but you really want to be mindful of what the community's vision is, and really infusing that in your design consideration from beginning to end is super important to ensure that the community vision is present. And sometimes it does have competing interests. So you have to be very creative at times to articulate what that need is and how it will enhance um, the goals and vision of other stakeholders in alignment with what the community's vision is. So if the community's vision is to have an event space, then you will want to try to create alignment to, let's say, businesses in the community that could benefit from that event space, policy opportunities that speak to cultural competent resources or programs that generate economic opportunity and community engagement, right? So you really want to look at different frameworks like that so that you can infuse that compromising of your scope and lean it towards the community's vision. So yeah, thanks for sharing that. Let's go ahead and close it out with the competitive sharks. Where are my competitive sharks? We'll have a few readouts, about 3 readouts for this section, and then we will move on with the lecture.
I can share mine.
Awesome.
So I was writing about something that impacts landscape architects. HOAs can be an example of a competing CM style because they know exactly what they want and how things should look, and they don't really allow for much room with negotiation.
Yes, it really limits creativity, especially if you live in a shared space. Maybe sometimes, when you have a condo or even a house, you have these community enclaves where the HOA dues impact, what type of decorations you can put up for the holidays, or what colors you can paint your home, or what type of landscapes you can add, whether that be grass or drought tolerant landscapes, right? So being mindful of those HOA constraints are really important, and it can be a very competitive situation when you're trying to you know push for creativity. But knowing the HOA regulations, you can you know use that constraint against it and make it a competition sometimes, right? So no, that's a good one, Maya. Thank you for sharing. Anybody else want to jump in for that? Two more, two more, two more. I'll go ahead and read one. Landscape architects can be compete through competitive pricing, offering clear estimates and flexible package which suits different budgets. Yes, 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 yes. This is definitely, capitalism and free market enterprises. And so landscape architects can definitely compete in the marketplace through competitive pricing and offering estimates that are, reflective of the deliverables, and make sure that they're affordable, right? And sometimes your packages can vary depending on what client you're speaking in front of. Let's say your package for a government contract may be different from your packages for a nonprofit if you're working with businesses or entities in that regard, or if you're working in Beverly Hills versus some of our less affluent communities in LA, right? So your pricing may be different depending on the square footage or the types of flora and fauna or the maintenance requirements that you attach to the project, right? So all of those things are super critical to be mindful of. And then within the free market, understanding how to rate your pricing so that it is competitive. And asking questions to your prospect clients to understand what let's say their current landscape architect is charging them, and then use that to develop a price that is more competitive, right? So really figuring out how to leverage competition to achieve your desired outcome. One more share out, and then we can go ahead and move on. Who wants to jump in there? One more share out. Let's see who we have on the call still. Let's see. Issy, do you want to jump in there?
Sure. I don't have one in this category, but I guess I'm looking at a landscape architect can fight against other architecture firms who might be bidding for the same project. So being competitive so that ultimately you win the bid, or to fight for the design that an architect wants, like the amount of plants in a space.
Mhm.
And I guess I'm thinking of like on public projects, how it's still kind of common for like even like landscape projects that architects are awarded like the lead design positions, and that landscape architects are still trying to kind of work their way into those positions so that we can advocate for, I think, like a maybe more conscious design of like living systems than maybe like an architect might be approaching a project from. So that's something that makes me think of.
And that brings up a good point because I think as more awareness is coming around issues like climate change and emergency, um, I feel their landscape architects should increase in demand, right? Because they're we understand that there's already so much development, and we understand that historically development hasn't been considerate of the environmental impacts or even the life cycle of a design, right? Where, the design is no longer used, and how do you refurbish material or reuse it, right? What does that look like in regards to upcycling or downcycling a project material after it's done being used, right? And so when we're talking about landscape design, when we're talking about that buffer between public and private domain, or even leveraging existing infrastructure of buildings to create living walls or rooftop gardens, right? Landscape architect is always a part of the conversation. And so really looking at ways to leverage that in a competitive sense to ensure that as we're addressing issues like carbon sequestration and different, again, issues that are coming up because of climate change, uh, landscape architects are considered project leaders for these different design spaces. And I think that there's cases that can be made in regards to that approach, and understanding that I think is important for you all as you grow in your careers as landscape architects to be aware of that, value add that you all have that's different from what an architect or an engineer could bring to these spaces. So thank y'all so much for participating in this activity. I hope you all enjoyed it. Thumbs up if y'all enjoyed this conflict management activity. Awesome, awesome. So we learned a little bit about these conflict management approaches, right? So we're looking at cooperation. The more we move to the right, away from avoiding and competing to compromising, accommodating, and collaborating, we're moving towards cooperation. Can you all see my screen? Yeah, I think y'all can. Just make sure. Right? So moving to the right, we're talking about compromising, accommodating, and collaborating. And then compromising again is in the middle of everything, the compromising fox. And then you have on the right, you have the accommodating teddy bear or the collaborative owl, right? In the middle, you have that compromising fox. You get some, I get some, we're good. Then you have the avoidant turtle, really not trying to deal with any competition, really not trying to engage, right? But that can be uncooperative, just avoiding the conversation, avoiding what the outcome or interest are of other stakeholders. Which again, if you're not interested in the outcome, then it is what it is. You can avoid it all day, regardless of what the outcome is. You're not worried about it, right? But on the other end of that, you have the competitive shark, and that competitive shark is coming from for all of it. And you're very assertive, you're pushing the issue, you're trying to shake the table to ensure that you get everything that you want and everything that you desire right now, right? So be mindful of these different approaches when you're thinking of your projects. You may not push any of these negotiation styles, but you may experience it, right? Maybe you come across someone who's being a competitive shark, or you may come across someone who's being an avoidant turtle, and you want to ensure that they're participating, so you're going out of your way to ensure that you get their insight and feedback, right? And so really learning how to leverage it, not only from the perspective of how you'll use it, but being able to detect it in context of how people show up. Does that sound good? Thumbs up if that sounds good to y'all. All right, all right. Making sure y'all still with me. Um, so now I should be able to boom. So now I want to go into our Bhatna Watna. We talked a little bit about this earlier. We're talking about these boundaries that we sometimes have to set up. The boundaries may be in relation to the constraints. We know that there may be economic constraints. So if, a client wants you to go above and beyond that, or the community's vision is above and beyond what you have the money for, then you need to speak to that and say, if y'all keep pushing this issue, there's nothing that we can do about this. It's our whatnot, right? Then you have situations where your best alternative to a negotiation agreement is at stake, right? So this video is going to talk a little bit about what this looks like in negotiation spaces, and then we'll come back and discuss it in relation to our class lecture. All right, so let's get to it. Boom.
Do you want to be a stronger, more collaborative and successful negotiator? Then you need to know about BATNAs and WATNAs. BATNAs and WATNAs help you maximise the strength of your bargaining position. They're used to make sure you don't put all your cakes in one basket and that you have a strong backup plan during negotiation. I'm Eleanor Shakiba, author of Difficult People Made Easy. In this video, I'll explain what BATNAs and WATNAs are. I'll help you to get a grip on how to identify them in hands-on situations, and I'll tell you how to use them to sound like a truly masterful negotiator. Meet Angie. Next week she's going to an important business meeting. Her own business is expanding rapidly, and this means she needs larger premises. Next Monday, she's negotiating a deal on her dream building. This shop has everything Angie needs, but there's a problem. The rent is 10% higher than what she can afford to pay. Angie's plan is to negotiate and bring that rent down. Angie is a smart operator, so she's doing lots of preparation for her meeting. She and Roberto have already worked out a negotiation strategy. This outlines all the tactics Angie can use to persuade the landlord to give her a good deal. But they haven't stopped there. Today they're planning what Angie will do if the deal falls through. They're preparing a BATNA and a WATNA. BATNA stands for Best Alternative to a Negotiated Agreement. WATNA is the opposite to BATNA. It stands for Worst Alternative to a Negotiated Agreement. Knowing her BATNA and WATNA will help Angie negotiate from a very strong position because it'll help her build a backup plan. Here's how Angie and Roberto work out their BATNA. They start by recapping all the options they can propose during the negotiation. These are options that fall within the frame of a negotiated agreement. They include options which promote Angela as a stable tenant and a few sweeteners to get the landlord on side. Next, Angie and Roberto brainstorm the alternatives which exist outside the frame of the negotiated agreement. These are possible options for action if the deal falls through, the alternatives which Angie will draw on to identify her BATNA. Once they've thought of as many alternatives as they possibly can, Angie and Roberto circle the most attractive option outside the box. This is their best alternative to a negotiated agreement, or their BATNA. Now they're ready to work out their WATNA. They do this by circling the least attractive option outside the box. This is their worst alternative to a negotiated agreement or their WATNA. Now Angie knows her worst case scenario. If she can't get a good deal with this landlord and she can't find other alternative premises, she may have to downsize her business. But that's not very likely to happen. So her WATNA is not a big threat to Angie's business. Meanwhile, Angie's BATNA is reasonably attractive. If she can't get a suitable deal on this shop, she'll find another one and negotiate a reasonable rent on that one. Knowing this means that Angie can take action now to boost her power in next week's negotiation. She sends Roberto on a road trip. His job is to find other shops they can rent if Angie's dream deal falls through. Meanwhile, Angie starts calling business owners who might want to share her dream premises with her. This means that even if Roberto's trip is fruitless, Angie will still have a viable backup plan. So today's the big day. Angie's bargaining power is vastly increased by the strength of her BATNA. She's able to stay calm, even when the landlord resorts to aggressive tactics, because she's got a strong fallback position. She holds firm and refuses to budge on the rent. Then she offers an irresistible concession, and the landlord rethinks his position. Angie gets the deal she wants because she's used her BATNA and her WATNA in combination with a great negotiating strategy. She's taken 5 steps to do this. Step 1. List your options inside the frame of an agreement. Step 2. List your options outside the frame of an agreement. Step 3. Choose your best alternative outside of the agreement. Step 4. Identify your worst alternative outside of the agreement. Step 5. Act to boost your BATNA. And remember, if you want to be a better negotiator, don't put all your cakes in one basket. I'm Eleanor Shakiba, and I wish you sweet success in your next negotiation.
So that was a quick video that went over the BOTNA, which stands for Best Alternative to Negotiation Agreement. This occurs when everything on your wish list is obtained. It is important to know what your BOTNA is before negotiation begins. Your WATNA stands for your worst alternative to negotiation agreement. This occurs when nothing on your wish list is obtained. Most negotiations result in outcomes between negotiation parties, BOTNA and their WATNA. So we're looking at values in context of the social determinants of health, principles within your project focus areas that are most closely aligned to where your identified stakeholder group, right? And so in this context, the video talks about like the landlord in that for a business owner who has a bakery. And so they talked about negotiating the terms of the agreement and the different concessions that, you know, the business was willing to make. And so when you're thinking of this in context of a design project, there are certain concessions that you can make in regards to your project scope to be mindful of the interests of the different stakeholders, but there are some constraints that can operate as guardrails. So you kind of want to understand your constraints as informing your worst alternatives to negotiation agreement and really the vision of your key stakeholders and how you've aligned that vision as your best alternative to a negotiation agreement, right? And so when you're discussing different tangibles with the different parties, you want to be able to pull on the threads that you feel will most interest that party. For example, if you're trying to convince business owners of supporting your site design, you may want to have an economic component in your site design that speak to interest of business owners. Many residents within the city of LA are street vendors, right? So people in the local community may be interested in selling their products and merchandise like their art or, different food vending. So being mindful of how your site may respond to the interests of business owners and produce economic opportunity is critical, right? Um, it may be important for uh youth to have a skate park at your site because they want to, have an active place that they can meet and gather, uh participate in health and wellness activities because skateboarding is a pretty active activity, and creating that aspect on your site is critical, but there may be some constraints to be mindful of that influence that, right? So what does it look like to write down your list of things that you can concede on, and then really being mindful of what your botna and your watna is, right? Just like the video described. For the sake of time, we're not going to break out for this activity. We may do this next week or, when we meet again. But this is a tool to navigate your BODNA, your WATNA in context of your issue, right? And so we're talking about a design aspect. Your site may have an interest or goal that is trying to address. Again, we're framing this in context of the social determinants of health. So you would address the social determinants of health issue, identify what that is. So in our course this semester, we've really been looking at social determinants of health in relation to neighborhood and built environment, social and community context, and economic stability. So we have lectures where it explains the different principles across these different social determinants of health and what some of the target goals and outcomes intended for these areas. And so what you would want to do is understand either the conflict or a solution opportunity that you all are trying to achieve for your said social determinants of health. And then for your project, you would want to identify what your BOTNA is and your WATNA is, just as described in the video, and then identify the values that you feel are most relevant. And these values should reflect the interests of your stakeholders. So values of economic opportunity, values of community space building, values of event space, values of um, wildlife habitats for local flora and fauna, right? Whatever those values are, you want to identify them. And then you want to figure out what your interests are, right? So again, understanding those different things. You have your botany and whatnot right here, but you're going to really identify some of those other interest areas in this worksheet. But this is really a great worksheet to identify the conflict within your stakeholders that you're engaging in the design process, right? And so this is a great tool, and we may be able to revisit this next week. But again, we're aligning these interests to the social determinants of health as it relates to your design project in the interests of your stakeholders, right? Again, businesses may be interested in economic opportunity. Uh, Again, you may be interested in place building. There may be opportunities for workforce development, housing, um, mental wellness through gardening, right? So what is it that is happening on your site that you're reflecting through these social determinants of health? And so this is another tool that we'll probably get to this semester where we'll be able to investigate how these different conflict management approaches may affect our BOTNA and WATNA, right? In relation to our conflict that we've identified, right? So taking the BOTNA and WATNA that you identify here, and then reflecting on how each of these different conflict management approaches may influence the outcome of your WATNA and your BOTNA, right? What I want to spend time on today is really understanding how your individuals that you're serving or who may be the end users to your design space may be reflecting on how they see themselves in your design. We know that there's different ways that their lives are impacted by the built environment with brick and mortar infrastructure, the systemic environment through policy, as well as the natural environment with how green space is either managed or allocated or preserved within their community. And we know that people are impacted by that infrastructure or by these systems. We have people who have different demographics in the way that they show up in regards to age, sex, and hereditary factors. But all of that's influenced by health and well-being in the neighborhood. So there's different ways that we're affected through neighborhoods in other regions, but also the macroeconomy and politics and culture and global forces that we engage with on a regular basis, right? So we talked a little bit about climate change, natural habitats, building places, working, shopping, moving, wealth creation, social capital, diet, and physical activity. Then you have global ecosystems, the natural environment, the built environment, activities, local economy, community, and lifestyle. And then you have biodiversity, air, water, land, streets, routes, living, playing, learning, markets, networks, and work-life balance, right? All of these things are influence how people show up, how they understand themselves, in culture, society, and experiences related to the environments we find ourselves inform all of these factors. And so when we're thinking of that, I've developed a theory on how we as people, as social beings, interact with each other on a day-to-day basis. And I think this is important because most of the time when we're building systems, it can influence the way people see themselves or how they can associate with those systems. So identity and sense of association is a theory that's based on how we socialize and engage with each other and understand how our identities influence that socialization and engagement. So this concept believes that our identity is made up of three parts, which includes our condition, which includes like our sex, our gender, our mental health, things of that nature. And then you have your behavior, which is your attitude, the way you wear your hair, maybe even the clothes you wear, and then the associations that we have. And so those are like the people that we associate with, the people that, we know, people are part of our family, community groups that we're a part of, social clubs that we may be a part of, and the social capital that may come with that, right? And so all of that informs how we're socially accepted into the cultural constructs that we find ourselves in, right? And so in America, we live in a very Western society that has a historic history of racism, to be frank, right? And then also identity has been informed by that history, how we value identity, how we incentivize identity has been informed by that history. And we're talking about here in America. And so in a lot of ways, what we prioritize as a culture are norms and conditions, behaviors, and associations that are aligned to white male patriarchy. And that sometimes is a challenge because we, as sometimes people of color, sometimes even women, sometimes even queer people are still playing into, this identity incentive that we get from kind of playing into patriarchy. We police each other into those practices, and we assess each other based off of our condition, our behavior, and association. But that doesn't always have to be the case. There's oftentimes subcultures that are created where the social construct is created by things as frivolous as whether or not you have an Android or an iPhone, right? Raise your hand if your team Android. Thumbs up if your team Android. Okay, we have a couple of thumbs up. Who's team iPhone? Thumbs up if your team iPhone. Right? So there's a lot of people who are team iPhone, and sometimes people get upset, right, when they see the text come up as green instead of blue, right? And it's like, oh, we can't even be friends anymore. So in our culture and society, we create these subcultures of what we'll incentivize for social acceptance, right? And so I think that that's an important concept to speak to, because a lot of times those concept of what we value is written in the public domain, and it's reflected in how we engage with infrastructure, or how we see ourselves in that infrastructure. In previous lectures this semester, we talked about violence in the built environment, right? And so sometimes you have landscapes, let's talk about here in Los Angeles, where they're honoring, Spanish conquistadors, and many of the conquistadors that are acknowledged are oftentimes responsible for genocide of thousands, if not millions, of Native American folks here in the Americas, right? And so, uh, who is that infrastructure for? Who is that statue honoring? Who is that an incentive for in regards to being able to have pride? And who does it isolate, right? In context of who's not being recognized, or who's being erased in some of the ways that, we're leveraging infrastructure like statues to reflect, culture and cultural acceptance, right? That's important. And then so we also have examples of Civil War veterans who fought on the side of the Confederacy, where there's many statues across the nation where these folks are being honored, even on fragment components like the Stone Mountain in Georgia, right? And so, how is someone who's a former enslaved person, whose ancestors were free because of Civil War, um, supposed to feel when they see uh, Robert E. Lee on a statue on the side of a mountain, right? So when we're thinking of ourselves now in this context of landscape designers, how are we building sites that are inclusive and reflective of culture that doesn't produce additional harm? And how do we know what that is? How do we define what that is? How do we inform a site design in context of that? And so I want us to take time to complete this activity. We'll do 15 minutes on this. It's an identity incentive association activity. I want you all to think of your internal processing of this. What conditions do you have that gives or take away power? What behavior do you exhibit to maintain power or interfere with power attainment? And then association, who or what do you associate with to assert your value or power? So this link is available on the presentation document. And so it has some instructions here. Your condition, health, gender, what conditions do I have that gives or takes away power? Behavior, clothing, speech, hair, style, what behavior do I exhibit to maintain power or that interferes with the power that you have? And then association, relationships, family, club, school, who or what do I associate with that asserts my value or power? And who or what do you have power over? And what does it allow you to decide? And lastly, can your presence impact someone else's power outcomes? So this is a very interesting activity, but I think it's an important one, so that you all can really be mindful of the privilege that you show up with individually or the privilege that you may lack, and how that may reflect some of the stakeholders that you need to consider in your design practices. So I'm going to put the link in the chat, but is also available on the presentation document. We'll come back at 8:40. Let's say 8. Yeah, let's say 8:40. I'll see y'all back shortly. Thumbs up if you need more time. Right. Well, let's go ahead and push through this. Um, so yeah, folks responding and each in response to these. So that's great. Thank you. I'm gonna go ahead and read some of these out loud. And then I just want you all to just reflect on some of these in context of yourselves, but also just the folks that may be interacting with your designs and thinking of, how their conditions, behavior, or association may impact their capacity to access your design. So reading from condition or health, race, gender, that impact or take away, that gives or takes away power. The condition that I have that gives is that I'm a woman in a minority, the same condition that can be applied by taking away power because of how society views women and minority groups in positions of power. Yes, historically, um, things like race and gender have been leveraged to decide who gets a seat at the table. For a long time, women were not allowed to work, go to school, even have their own credit card or bank account, right? These are real things that were cultural practices within our society. And it's important to understand that because, today women are still fighting for an equal seat at the table, for pay, and even the governance of their own body, not to get too political. Um, the conditions that I have is race. It plays with the power within our society, as historically speaking, people of color and mixed race don't have the same amount of power as other groups. That is true. Here in America, there was the one drop rule, and there was also all of these different racial categories that were created to group people based off of how much they were mixed with white, right? They had categories like mulatto, Cameroon, and other different uh, descriptions and categories to categorize people by their skin tone or ethnic makeup. I'm white, which gives me privilege in many ways. I'm a woman, and in some ways that gives me privileges, but it also takes away some power from me. Again, thinking about gender and how that shows up um, in the way that society treats it. Um, it again, women to this day make substantially less than men by dollar amount in the workforce, and that is drastically impacted not only by gender, but it gets worse by race, right? The condition that I have is that I'm a woman and white. Being a woman gives me some privilege. Okay, yes, just read that one. I'm a queer white woman. Depending on the room I'm in, these aspects of my identity can empower me or take power away, right? And I think that that's powerful too, right? The way that we create community around our identities and the support systems that we create um, really help, right? And I think that's something that is still being developed for a lot of folks. A lot of because we're so incentivized to behave in certain ways, sometimes we may not be aware of some of the conditions that we have, especially if we're talking about like mental health or social conditions. And so sometimes many folks find themselves performing this good behavior because, they've been socialized to know what's expected, but their capacity to perform those things, comes and goes, right? But within communities that understand that, for example, people who are neurodivergent, whether you're on the spectrum or you have ADD or any other neurodivergent condition, sometimes when you have a support system within your friend group or within your family who understands some of the quirks that you have or some of the support you may need to remember your phone, or maybe that you may forget your phone or your wallet, and that you might have to turn the car back around, and your friends kind of give you, the space and grace for that. Those things are really, really important. So like creating community is important, but also like with queer identity, having friends groups, right? That respect your identity, who empower you to be yourself and to be free to express yourself in all the ways that you desire is super important, right? So again, creating community. Um, Being an immigrant, shout out to immigrant, I think it's month or day, in immigrant community day. Being an immigrant who moved here to the US in my teenage years, I felt that I was powerless in a foreign country. But as decades passed by, I was able to navigate my way. And now I feel more empowered as an immigrant and as a woman, but it took a lot of time. Yes. Thank you so much for sharing that. And it is true, sometimes it can be challenging to relocate to a whole new country and have to learn a new language or definitely a new culture. Even sometimes, like, folks come from other countries and they know English because English is well known, for example. But sometimes folks are learning English for the first time. But the culture of America could be completely different, even if you know English from a country that you're coming from, right? And so getting used to that, especially in the age of being a teenager when you're learning so much about yourself, right? And accepting new truths about the world and your parents and your family and just all of the things. It can be a whole nother thing to try to get used to living in a whole new country. So that empowerment then could be realized, like you said, we talked a little bit about community, and then just also just the new experiences that come from being in a new place, and learning, how it's different or how you may be able to access things differently here than you were able to in different places. Some really good stuff here. I'll read one more from this. Oh, one more to go. Being a man and being pale obviously comes with privilege. Being a mixed person of color means that the privilege is fleeting and the rug could be pulled from under you at any minute. It also means that I don't necessarily have access to the same social networks or generational wealth assets as middle class white folks, for example. You're expected to assimilate, but you're periodically reminded of how you don't belong. And so, yeah, and that's where, sometimes it comes to, we have our identity and then we have our behavior, right? So sometimes our behavior can influence the type of belonging that we have, either pushes us out of belonging or pushes us into community, right? So let's move to behavior. A behavior that I exhibit to maintain power is to keep within the current fashion trends and use my ability of freedom of expression a speech on issues that require more attention and use more power to put into them. That's powerful. I know we're wrapping up on time, so I'm not going to keep us too much after. So let me read one from association. I have a lot of connections through family, friends, and coworkers to people who are interested in having their landscape redesigned. So I feel that when I graduate, I will have work available. So yes, having those networks and relationships is super critical, and they can be leveraged to move your goals forward, to help you with mentorship, to help you when things get challenging. So who or what do you have power over? I have power over my reactions, powerful to certain situations I've come across. Depending on that, the outcome of the situations can either escalate or not. It's not what happens to you, but how you react to it. Epictetus. Good stuff there. Let's go to this last one. Can your presence impact someone else's power outcomes? Yes, I believe that if someone is in power who looks like me witnesses my presence, might be influenced to do their best to continue to work. So the more people that look like me can maintain them in power. So this is really good stuff. I hope these were some reflective activities for you all. One thing I do want to mention is I am going to be adding, uh, we're going to be finishing some of this discussion next week um, so that we can get through some of the activities that we didn't go through, which I think will be important. But I do appreciate y'all participation in the activities that we were able to get through. And thumbs up if you enjoyed those activities. Awesome, awesome. With that being said, I was able to update the midterm link for it wasn't available on Friday. Many of you did reach out to me. I was able to update that, and so I will keep that available until Wednesday the 30th. So get your midterm submitted as soon as possible. I'll be on for about 5 minutes for folks that want to stay on and ask any questions, but I will let you all go for the evening.
Professor, can you hear me?
Yes.
I got my mic finally charged up. Just a quick question on one of the assignments that's due tonight, the case study project.
Uh-huh.
It in the instructions it had it set for a 12 to 15 slide presentation. Do you want it that long?
Um, Let me see.
Because the reading itself is only a couple pages, if I have it up correctly. Let me see here, parking.
In context of the framework, there should be enough pages for you to get through.
Mm-hmm.
But if you get it to like, let's say 8 to 10,
Yeah.
that should be okay. I'm not going
Okay.
to dock you too many points for that. But
Alrighty.
because the framework does require you to go through several considerations,
Uh-huh.
my thinking is that the framework should get you closer to those,
Okay.
you
Yeah,
know.
I'm already like at 8 slides, so I think I can get another 4 out.
Okay, okay,
Okay,
cool.
perfect. Thank you.
No problem.
Alrighty, have a good night. Go Dodgers. We won, so
Congratulations
thank
again.
you.
That's three
Alrighty.
down, one more to go.
That's it. That's it. Alrighty. Good night.
All right, go.